I have seen some crazy birthday gifts, but have you ever seen a woman give away the house her fiancé spent years saving for to her male best friend? To make matters worse, when I confronted her, Isabella Thompson had the nerve to point right at me and say, "A man is nothing without a home of his own, and Mark Sullivan needs this place more than you do." As I watched them kiss in front of everyone, I did not explode in anger, but instead I calmly slid off my engagement ring and placed it on Mark's finger, telling him that since he was taking the house, he might as well take the fiancée too. Everyone in the room thought I had lost my mind, but they had no idea that this single choice would lead to Isabella kneeling on the ground 6 months from now, begging for a second chance. It all went down at Isabella's birthday party in Chicago. My own fiancé gave away the house I'd spent my entire career saving for, the very home where we were supposed to start our lives together, handing it over as a birthday gift to Mark because she treated him like he was the center of the universe. She stood there and told the whole room that a man needs a house to have any dignity. Mark looked deeply moved by her words, pulling her into a hug and kissing her right in front of me. I simply turned around and started to walk away because with the house gone, there was no reason to go through with the wedding. Then Mark Sullivan called out to me from across the room, asking where his gift was since it was his birthday. I looked down at my empty hand while the other guests stared at me like I was some kind of cheapskate just there for the free catering. It was clear they all saw me as a loser who was just riding Isabella's coattails. Isabella looked embarrassed by my presence and snapped at me, demanding to know how I could be so rude as to show up empty-handed. She told me to go out and buy Mark a Rolex later just to apologize for my behavior. I was already exhausted from a 12-hour shift when she forced me to come to this event in the first place. I had arrived only to watch her hand over our future home to another man. I was far too drained to start a shouting match with her right then. I told her that I actually did have a gift. Then I took off my engagement ring and slid it onto Mark's finger, wishing him and Isabella the very best of luck together. I walked out of the room without saying another word to anyone. Isabella chased after me and grabbed my wrist, accusing me of taking things too far and insisting that Mark was just like a brother to her. I looked her in the eye and told her that I wasn't trying to annoy anyone. I just genuinely felt Mark deserved the ring more than I did. Isabella scoffed, acting as if Mark would never want to wear such a cheap piece of jewelry. I told her that he was more than welcome to throw it away if he didn't like it. She snapped back that she didn't care what happened to it, but warned me never to ask her for a replacement before she turned around and stormed back into the party. When we first got engaged, the Thompson family demanded $50,000 as a gesture of my commitment, making it clear they wouldn't be contributing a cent to the wedding. I wasn't the type to obsess over money, so I handed over my entire life savings to satisfy them. I truly believe that our love was worth more than any bank balance. My only request in return was that she buy me an engagement ring, but Isabella called me materialistic for even asking. She couldn't understand why a man would care about wearing a ring at all. We didn't speak for an entire week until she finally gave in and agreed to buy a pair of bands that cost about $300. I cherished my ring, but hers had mysteriously vanished months ago without any explanation. I finally understood that you can never truly own something that you have to force into existence. As I left the hotel and walked down the sidewalk, a freezing wind whipped against my face, but I felt absolutely nothing. My heart was far colder than the Chicago winter air at that moment. A short while later, Isabella called me to complain that her stomach was hurting and to ask where I had gone. I thought to myself that she should just take some medicine and wondered why she was even calling me, though in the past, I would have dropped everything and raced across the city to be with her. I was finished acting as her unpaid caretaker, so I hung up the phone and called my manager, Leo Harrison. I asked him if the offer to lead our marketing team in London was still on the table. Leo sounded genuinely excited and told me that he had always valued my ambition and work ethic. He told me I would be perfect for expanding our international presence. I thanked him and promised not to let the company down. I immediately booked a flight for the following week, bought myself a high-end suit I had been eyeing, and enjoyed a quiet dinner alone. I had a good salary, but I'd spent years living frugally just to afford that house. It was a cruel irony that Isabella shattered my dream the very moment it was finally within my grasp. I sat in the mall until the security guards closed the doors, finally heading back to the apartment around midnight. The sound of thumping bass hit me the second I opened the front door. Mark and a group of his friends were throwing a wild party right in the middle of my living room. They had smeared cake and frosting all over my expensive leather sofa, and the floor was covered in trash. I had personally picked out every single detail of that house with love and care, and now it was being trashed. I was absolutely fuming as I flipped on the overhead lights. The sudden glare brought the party to a halt, and the group looked at me with pure annoyance. I fought to keep my voice steady as I told them all to get out of my house. Mark swaggered toward me, waving the property deed in my face with a smug grin. He asked if I was getting senile, reminding me that Isabella had already given the house to him. His friends started laughing and agreed that the place belonged to Mark now, meaning they could do whatever they wanted. One of them even suggested that Mark should change the locks to keep random people from sneaking in. I reached out and snatched the deed from Mark's hand to check the details. I pointed out that both Isabella's name and my name were still on the title, and I threatened to call the police for trespassing if they didn't leave immediately. Mark looked embarrassed for a split second before snapping back at me. He told me to stop acting so high and mighty because Isabella had promised to officially transfer the title to him the next morning. I told him firmly that since the house belonged to both of us, the transfer required my signature, which I would never give. Mark was livid and immediately called Isabella, who showed up at the house just a few minutes later. Mark immediately started acting like the victim, complaining to Isabella that I was threatening them with legal action. Isabella frowned at me and pulled me aside, telling me that I was making a scene over a house she had already given away. She tried to pull me toward the door, saying we should just leave. I shook her hand off and asked her what right she had to give away a house that was bought with my hard-earned money. Isabella felt humiliated in front of her friends and began to scream, asking if I really wanted to pick a fight. She then brought up the $100,000 she had lent to my adoptive parents, asking why I hadn't mentioned that. Mark and his friends acted shocked, calling me a total mooch for living off a woman's money. They said Isabella must be a saint for putting up with a freeloading guy like me. They even joked that whoever ended up marrying me would be cursed with terrible luck. Their insults made my face burn with shame and filled me with a crushing sense of self-doubt. I had grown up in an orphanage before being adopted, and my life had never been easy. When my adoptive parents found out I was dating a girl from a wealthy family like the Thompsons, they had pressured Isabella into lending them $100,000. That debt had always made me feel inferior and insecure whenever I was around her. I truly believed Isabella understood my situation, but here she was exposing my deepest shame to a room full of people. I tried to stay calm as I pulled out the piece of paper where I had calculated our finances during dinner. I explained that I had contributed $126,000 toward the house. Even after subtracting the $100,000 my parents took, she still owed me $26,000. I told her that if she paid me that balance, the house would be hers to do with as she pleased. Isabella stared at my notes in shock, clearly not expecting me to be so clinical about her breakup. She told me she thought I was better than this, but that I was actually just as petty as everyone else. I let out a dry laugh and told her that if she was so generous, she should have no problem paying me the $26,000. My words hit a nerve, and she immediately used her phone to transfer the money to my account. Once the transaction cleared, I told her I would see her at the county recorder's office at 8 the next morning. Isabella gritted her teeth and told me that I would be the one crawling back to her in tears before long. Mark looked delighted and promised they would both be there on time. I left the neighborhood and checked into a nearby hotel, but even seeing the new balance in my bank account couldn't stop the overwhelming sadness. That was when Mark Sullivan sent me a voice recording over Instagram. In the audio, Mark was mockingly asking Isabella what she ever saw in a loser like me who had no looks and no money. Isabella's laughter rang out as she explained she was just having some fun with a charity case. She said it was entertaining to mess with poor students who struggled to eat but still try to hold on to their pathetic pride. She admitted in the recording that she was getting tired of how I fussed over every little detail. Mark's loud, obnoxious laughter filled the rest of the clip, making it clear she had been toying with me from the very beginning. I first met Isabella Thompson during my sophomore year at the University of Chicago. My adoptive parents refused to help with my tuition or living expenses, so I had to work 2 part-time jobs while studying. I survived on the cheapest food I could find in the cafeteria until my body finally gave out. I ended up fainting from exhaustion and malnutrition during a physical education class. Isabella and a few other students carried me to the campus health clinic, and she became a constant presence in my life after that. She used to pretend she had accidentally added money to my meal card and would insist that I join her for lunch and dinner. She would always give me the best portions of her food to help me get my strength back. Eventually, she confessed that she had feelings for me, but I was hesitant because I felt my background wasn't good enough for her. Over time, she managed to break through my walls and find a place in my heart. I truly believe she was my savior, but now I saw that I had wasted 5 years of my youth on a lie. The next morning, I woke up early and did my best to hide how exhausted I felt before meeting Isabella and Mark. I wasn't going to let them see how much they had hurt me. I styled my hair and put on the expensive new suit I had bought, looking sharper than I ever had before. Isabella actually looked stunned when she saw me standing there. Mark, looking annoyed, commented that the suit must have cost a fortune and asked if I was already blowing the money Isabella gave me. Isabella frowned and asked why a frugal person like me would suddenly buy such an expensive outfit. I smiled at her and explained that the money I received yesterday was a refund of my own cash. I also made it clear that I didn't need her permission to buy anything I wanted anymore. I told her that I used to save every penny for our future, but since I no longer had a house or a partner, there was no reason to be stingy. Mark rolled his eyes at my comment and tightened his grip on Isabella's arm. Mark urged Isabella to hurry inside, claiming that he wanted to be the first person to complete a property transfer that day. Isabella hesitated for a moment, looking back at me to ask if I had anything else to say. She seemed to be waiting for me to beg her to stop. I simply smiled and told her that I wished him the best and hoped Mark enjoyed his new home. Isabella's face clouded over as she warned me not to regret my decision later. The paperwork went through without a hitch, and Mark walked out of the office clutching the deed with a massive grin. I was relieved to finally have everything settled and was ready to leave when Isabella called out to me. She mentioned that the bridal boutique had called about our wedding photos and said I could come along since I had dressed up to impress her. She actually thought I was trying to win her back. I turned around and looked at her like she had completely lost her mind. I asked her why on earth I would marry her now that the house was gone. Isabella looked flustered and confused, so I made it very clear that we were breaking up and the wedding was officially canceled. I asked her if she understood, but she just stared at me and asked if I was joking since the wedding was only a week away. I told her that canceling the wedding was a small request compared to her giving away our house at the very last minute. I wasn't going to be guilted into staying with her. I looked at Mark and suggested that they just swap the grooms since he already had the house and the ring. Mark clutched the deed to his chest and eagerly told Isabella that he was ready to stand by her side. He was more than happy to take my place in every way. Isabella took a serious tone and reminded me that she only viewed Mark as a younger brother who had no one else in the world. She argued that it would take him forever to afford a home on his own. She seemed to think her charity work justified destroying our future. She claimed she was just being a good sister by helping him out and accused me of being irrationally jealous. She had told me many times about how Mark was orphaned as a child and had to live with his uncle's family. She used his tragic backstory as a shield for her behavior. She always expected me to be sympathetic toward his situation, but I finally reached my breaking point. I asked her why Mark's misfortune meant he was entitled to live off her and receive a free house. I want to know why his needs always came before mine. I asked her what she had ever actually given me, considering I had a difficult life as well. Isabella looked at me with total confidence and said that I had her, as if her presence alone was the ultimate prize. I couldn't believe how incredibly full of herself she was. I was done arguing, so I simply turned around and walked away from both of them. That night, I posted an update on Facebook announcing that Isabella and I were over and the wedding was officially canceled. I wanted everyone to know the truth before the rumors started. Many of our old friends from the University of Chicago commented with their regrets, saying they always thought we were the perfect campus couple. If I hadn't heard those voice recordings, I might have still believed that our love was real. Now, I knew it was all just a performance for her. I realized then that our entire relationship had been a facade. It didn't take long for Isabella to call me, screaming about who gave me the right to cancel the wedding without her consent. She insisted that the ceremony was still going to happen. I told her in a cold, flat voice that she could do whatever she wanted, but I wouldn't be showing up. I told her that we were even and that I was done with her. Isabella refused to let it go and kept pressing me for a different answer. She asked if I was really throwing our relationship away over a piece of property. I told her that was exactly right. Isabella would never understand that to me. It wasn't just a building, it was the dream of finally having a real home. When she realized I was serious, her tone shifted into a fake compromise. She suggested that we could just save up for a few more years and buy a different house later. She spoke as if it were the easiest thing in the world to start all over again. I thought about the last 2 years where I hadn't bought myself a single new shirt or pair of shoes. I would skip meals or rush home to cook just to save a few extra dollars for our down payment. The thought of that house was the only thing that kept me going through the hard times. All that sacrifice was wiped out in an instant because she decided Mark was more important. Now she was casually telling me to spend another 30 years chained to a mortgage just to satisfy her whims. I realized I was done being the fool who suffered while she played games. I told Isabella that while a house was my dream, I no longer wanted to build a life with her. As soon as I hung up, my adoptive parents called and began berating me without a shred of mercy. They were furious that I was ruining their financial arrangement. They made it clear that since I was the one calling off the wedding, they had no intention of paying back the $100,000 they owed Isabella. They told me that the debt was now my responsibility to handle alone. I wasn't even surprised by their lack of loyalty. I knew they had already blown all that money on my brother's failed business ventures. I never expected to see a cent of it again, but I realized I could use the situation to my advantage one last time. I told them I would come over the next day to settle everything. I promised to meet them the following day to discuss the next steps. That night, Isabella bombarded my phone with hundreds of iMessages. She started by ordering me to show up at the wedding, but eventually shifted to desperate pleading. I didn't even bother reading most of them before I blocked her number for good. The next morning, I went to my parents' house with a legal agreement I had prepared. My adoptive parents and my brother, Tyler Miller, looked at me with pure disgust the moment I walked in. They treated me like my very presence was polluting their home. My adoptive mother, Martha Miller, finally spoke up and asked how I could throw away such a good relationship when we were so close to the wedding. She acted like I was the one who had failed. I looked at them calmly and lied, telling them that the Thompsons were demanding another $50,000 for the wedding and the immediate return of the $100,000 loan. I told them that Isabella wouldn't marry me unless those conditions were met. Martha shook her head and insisted that they didn't have a penny to give. She reminded me of how much they had spent on my food and education since the day they adopted me. She made it clear that I was a financial burden they were no longer willing to carry. I wanted to laugh at the sheer hypocrisy of her words. My adoptive father, Robert Miller, slammed his fist on the table and told me to just forget about the marriage then. He said there were plenty of other fish in the sea and that I shouldn't be so desperate. I told them that if the wedding didn't happen, the Thompsons would demand their $100,000 back immediately. Tyler, who had been ignoring us to play video games, suddenly panicked and shouted that it was impossible. He admitted he had already invested all that money with some friends and couldn't get it back. He said there was no way to recover the funds in the near future. I pretended to be deeply worried and asked what we were going to do. I told them that the Thompsons were threatening to call the police and file fraud charges if the money wasn't returned. Martha was outraged, arguing that it couldn't be fraud since I had been dating Isabella for years. Her lack of a moral compass made me feel sick to my stomach. I decided I was done playing these games and was ready to cut them out of my life. I suggested that there was one other way to handle the situation. I told them I would sign a document severing all ties with the family and take full legal responsibility for the $100,000 debt. That way, if the police were called, they would only come after me. Their faces lit up with relief the moment they realized they could get away scot-free. They all agreed it was a brilliant idea and didn't hesitate for a second to sign the severance agreement. They were more than happy to trade me for $100,000. Once the papers were signed, I prepared to leave, but Martha invited me to stay for lunch. I figured this would be the last time I ever saw them, so I agreed to stay for one final meal. I wanted to see if there was even a shred of genuine affection left in that house. Now that they were no longer worried about the debt, they went right back to their normal routines. Martha went to the kitchen, Robert turned on a spy movie, and Tyler went back to his games. I sat there feeling like a complete stranger in the only home I had ever known. I walked over and pushed open the bathroom door, noticing that the small folding cot I used to sleep on was finally gone. The house only had 2 bedrooms, one for my parents and one for Tyler. I had spent my entire childhood sleeping on a cot that moved from the living room to the hallway. I actually had my own room when I was first adopted, but that changed the moment Tyler was born. My room was taken away, and I was relegated to a folding bed that was tucked into whatever corner was available. I never truly felt like I belonged in that family. They never treated me like a real son, which was exactly why I was so desperate to build a life with Isabella. I just wanted a place where I finally felt like I was home. I had put all my hopes into a woman who saw me as nothing more than a toy. Martha had prepared a huge spread for lunch, but every single dish was something Tyler loved. There wasn't a single thing on the table that I actually enjoyed eating. I forced the food down, but it tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I walked out of that neighborhood feeling like a ghost of my former self. I was shocked to see Isabella waiting for me at the front gate, looking genuinely worried. She reached out and handed me a tissue without saying a word. It was only then that I realized I was actually crying, which explained why the wind felt so cold on my cheeks. Isabella asked me why I kept coming back to a place that always made me so miserable. She seemed to think she was the only one who cared about my well-being. I took the tissue and wiped my eyes, telling her that I only came back to let them know the wedding was off. Isabella froze in place and asked why I couldn't just let the house issue go. She reminded me that she had already promised to help me buy a new one eventually. I looked at her without any emotion and told her that I simply didn't love her anymore. She refused to believe me, insisting that my feelings couldn't just vanish overnight after I had loved her so deeply for years. She was desperate to find some other explanation for my behavior. I told her she could believe whatever she wanted, but then her phone started ringing with Mark's name on the screen. She hesitated for a second before answering and telling him that she had asked him not to call her so much. Even now, he was still the one interrupting our lives. Mark's voice sounded like he was in agony as he told her he had fallen and twisted his ankle. Isabella's expression immediately shifted to one of intense concern as she asked him where he was and promised to come right away. Her priorities were as clear as they had always been. She got his location and looked at me through her car window, apologizing and saying she had to take Mark to the hospital. She promised she would come back for me as soon as she was done. I just gave her a faint smile and nodded my head. I told her to go ahead and not keep him waiting since a twisted ankle could be very painful. She looked relieved by my reaction and told me to wait for her return. Then she floored the gas and her car disappeared into the Chicago traffic like an arrow. I had witnessed this exact scene more times than I could count. Mark Sullivan only had to snap his fingers and she would come running no matter what we were doing. Isabella was wrong about my feelings because my love for her hadn't died suddenly. My love had slowly withered away through years of being ignored and disappointed. Sure enough, it wasn't long before I saw a new post from Mark on TikTok. He was standing perfectly fine on both feet, clearly faking the injury to get her attention. Isabella used to promise me that she would always be there when I needed her, and she claimed she never broke her word. The photo showed her tenderly feeding him soup while he lounged on the couch. Right below that was a post from the day before. He had captioned it by saying that a man needs a house to stand tall, and that he was so happy she had given him one. There was also a post about a trip to Disney World that she had been planning for a long time. These were all things she had never once offered to do with me. In the past, these kinds of posts would have started a massive argument between us. Now, I simply went through and liked every single one of his photos. I was back at my hotel and finished with my nightly routine when Isabella finally remembered I existed and called me. She sounded exhausted as she told me she was at the gate to pick me up. I told her not to bother because I was already back at my hotel. Isabella sounded annoyed and complained that I had left without telling her, making her drive all over the city looking for me. She asked if I had any idea how tired she was after such a long day. I laughed and asked her if she really thought I was that stupid. I told her to look at the time and asked why she ever expected me to wait around for her. I remember a holiday where we had planned a long hike together, but Mark called her away before we even reached the halfway point. She told me to wait for her, so I climbed to the summit and sat there from sunrise until the moon came up. I was a fool back then. Deep down, I knew she wasn't coming back, but I stubbornly stayed there just to see if she would eventually remember me. When she finally did call, her first words weren't an apology, but a scolding. She asked me if I was an idiot for staying up there so long. She told me I was just being dramatic by not coming down on my own. Isabella seemed to remember that moment too, because her voice suddenly softened. She apologized and promised that she would never leave me behind like that again. I told her that her apologies didn't mean anything to me anymore. For the next few days, she kept calling me and even waited outside my office, but she would still ditch me the second Mark Sullivan called her. This pathetic cycle continued right up until the day before our scheduled wedding. Isabella looked me in the eye and told me that Mark was being discharged from the hospital and had no family to help him. She insisted that she was the only person he could rely on, but promised it would be the very last time. She claimed she would keep her distance from him once we were officially married. I have no idea why she thought my indifference and the cancellation were just a temper tantrum. She honestly believed that I would still show up at the altar on Saturday morning. I was completely finished trying to explain myself to her. As soon as she left, I packed my bags for my new life in London. It was a perfect coincidence that my flight was scheduled for the same day as the wedding. I knew she would finally realize I wasn't bluffing when I didn't show up. Right before I boarded the plane, I checked my iMessages one last time. Isabella was panicking, asking why the limo hadn't arrived and why the tailor said I never picked up my suit. She kept asking where I was and reminding me that it was our wedding day. I sent her a pin of my current location at O'Hare International Airport and then turned off my phone. I have to admit that the thought of her standing there in a panic actually made me feel better. As I looked out at the clear blue sky, I knew that a brand new life was waiting for me. 6 months passed, and I returned to Chicago as the new international marketing director. I had just finished presenting our successful quarterly results at the corporate headquarters. As I stepped out of the building, I saw Isabella Thompson waiting for me by the entrance. She didn't look like the vibrant, confident woman I once knew. Her face looked tired and worn down by life. The second she saw me, she rushed forward and threw her arms around me, crying out and asking where I had been for the last half year. She sobbed that she had looked everywhere for me, but couldn't find a single lead. I already knew she had been calling the office, but I had instructed everyone to keep my location strictly confidential. My colleagues were more than happy to help me stay hidden from her. Word had gotten around about how she gave our house to Mark, and none of our mutual friends wanted anything to do with her after that. She had eventually stopped coming around the office after hitting so many dead ends. I looked at her now and realized how much my taste in women had improved. I assumed she had finally given up on me, so I was surprised to see her there. I placed my hands on her shoulders and gently pushed her away so I could look at her objectively. It was pathetic how much I had once loved someone who treated me so poorly. It was embarrassing to think that I had almost lost my entire identity over someone like her. My voice was cold and distant as I asked her why she was looking for me. I reminded her that I had made my feelings very clear before I left for London. Isabella was clearly emotional as she begged me to let her take me somewhere special. She was convinced that I would forgive her once I saw what she had done. I told her that my time was far too valuable to waste on her and turned to walk away. Isabella grabbed my arm and practically shoved me into the back seat of her car, locking the doors before I could react. I was seconds away from calling the police when she started pleading with me to just give her this one chance. She promised that if I still hated her after this, she would leave me alone forever. She swore that this would be the last time she ever bothered me if I wasn't moved by what she had to show me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I put my phone away and decided to see what she was up to. I wondered what kind of place could possibly make up for everything she had done. The streets we were driving through started to look very familiar, and we eventually pulled up in front of the apartment building where our house was. I had a sinking feeling in my gut as she led me upstairs to the front door. She stopped at the entrance of the home we were supposed to share. She used her key to open the door, and I was stunned to see that the interior looked exactly the way I had originally designed it. The fabric sofas were back. There was a fresh bouquet of tulips on the table, and every single ornament Mark's friends had broken had been replaced. It was like stepping back in time. Isabella pulled out a new property deed and showed me that both of her names were back on the title as of 3 months ago. She handed the document to me with a look of pure desperation and admitted that she had been completely wrong. She seemed to think this gesture would fix everything. She explained that because they grew up together and he lost his parents so young, she had been conditioned to protect him. Over the years, that protective instinct had turned into an unhealthy obsession. She finally realized that she had prioritized the wrong man. She told me that the last 6 months without me had made her realize that I was the most important person in her life. She claimed she loved me and had fought to get the house back from Mark just to prove it. She hoped that returning the house would finally end the war between us. Her speech was moving, but it would have only worked on the man I used to be. The person I am today didn't need her or her house anymore. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and dangled them in front of her face. I told her that I didn't need to rely on anyone else to achieve my goals anymore. Building up the London market over the last 6 months had been incredibly difficult, but the rewards were more than worth the effort. I had finally found my own strength. My salary had doubled, and combined with the money she had returned to me, I was able to put a down payment on a nice studio apartment in the city. It wasn't a mansion, and it wasn't in the most expensive neighborhood, but it was mine. It was a place where I finally felt safe. I told her that I finally had a real home of my own. Isabella stared at my keys in silence, her eyes filling with tears as the reality of the situation set in. She finally whispered a question, asking if there was truly no chance for us to start over. I told her there was absolutely no chance without a moment's hesitation. As the tears streamed down her face, I could tell she finally understood that it was over. All the effort she spent getting the house back from Mark and redecorating it hadn't earned her a single ounce of my forgiveness. My new life was the only reality check she needed. I turned and walked out of the apartment without feeling any need to comfort her. On my way out of the building, I ran into Mark Sullivan, who was looking at me with pure hatred in his eyes. Mark sneered at me, asking if I was proud of myself and if I thought I had one. I had never respected him in the past, and I certainly wasn't going to start now. I ignored him and kept walking, but he shouted after me from the sidewalk. He yelled that Isabella was pregnant with his child and that she would belong to him forever. I didn't even break my stride as I smiled and told him that I wished the 3 of them a very happy life together. I was genuinely glad to be rid of both of them. My return to Chicago was proving to be more eventful than I expected. After dealing with Isabella, my adoptive parents showed up at my office to cause a scene. It turned out that Tyler Miller had lost $100,000 on another one of his brilliant investment ideas. To make matters worse, he had been scammed while trying to recover the money overseas. My parents had sold their home and emptied their retirement accounts to raise $140,000, but they still needed another $60,000. They naturally expected me to just hand it over. I didn't hesitate to report their harassment to the authorities. When that didn't work, they tried to shame me on Facebook by claiming I was an ungrateful son. I responded by posting a scanned copy of the legal agreement we had all signed to sever our ties. I also shared a detailed account of what my life was really like growing up in their house. The public response was massive, and I received thousands of messages from other people who had similar experiences in the foster system. I had no idea that so many people would relate to my story. We formed an online community to support one another, using my journey as a source of inspiration. I realized that while we can't choose the families we are born or adopted into, we have the power to build our own futures through hard work. We were all survivors in our own way. My parents' attempt to guilt-trip me backfired completely as they were torn apart by people online. They eventually went into hiding after the backlash became too much to handle. They managed to raise the money to pay off Tyler's debts, but they were never able to bring him back home. The loss of their biological son caused both of them to have a complete mental breakdown, which tragically led to their double suicide. When I heard the news, I took a day off work to return to my hometown and handle the funeral arrangements. It was the final duty I would ever perform for them. 5 years later, I had worked my way up to vice president and was officially transferred back to the Chicago headquarters. Our company was hosting a major charity gala to provide medical support for children with congenital heart defects. I was attending as the primary corporate representative. I was busy greeting donors when I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Isabella Thompson, and she was holding a very frail-looking little boy. She was there to apply for the very charity program that my company was funding. I eventually learned the horrifying truth that Mark had drugged her to get her pregnant so she would never leave him. They had a shotgun wedding because of the child, but the substances Mark used had caused severe developmental issues. The baby was born with a life-threatening heart condition. They had spent every cent they had on medical bills, and Mark had eventually abandoned them when things got too difficult. Even though she had hurt me, I decided to speak with the program directors on her behalf. I couldn't let a child suffer for the mistakes of his parents. Thanks to my recommendation, Isabella's son was approved for full financial support for his surgery. As I was leaving the event in my town car, Isabella ran after me with the boy in her arms to thank me. I didn't even roll down the window. I just gave a polite wave and kept going. One of my colleagues later asked why I didn't take the opportunity to get revenge or settle the old score. I told them that there was absolutely no need for that. I'd already moved on to a life she could only dream of. We had both started out with the same opportunities, but years later, our paths couldn't be more different. I was at the absolute peak of my career, while she was just another person in the crowd begging for my help. That realization was a more powerful form of justice than any revenge could ever be. Seeing how far I had come while she had fallen so low was the ultimate punishment for her. True security never comes from the promises other people make about the future. It comes from your own ability to walk away and rebuild your life from scratch whenever you need to. You must always remember that while people can steal your hard work, they can never take away your talent or your drive. You don't have to be anyone else's savior. You just need to be the light in your own life. I hope that after everything you go through, you realize that the only person you can truly rely on to protect you is yourself.